Broad Street Review podcast is an extension of Broad Street Review, Philly's home for arts, culture, and conversation, an online arts and culture journal covering the greater Philadelphia area. I'm your host, Darnell Radford. Today on the podcast, I sit down with one of Broad Street Review's longtime contributors, Kelsall, to talk about arts criticism, being a Barrymore judge, finding the best seat in the theater, and reclaiming your time. Here is my interview with BSR contributor Kelsall. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Darnell Radford, and today I'm in the virtual studio with a BSR contributor, Kelsall. Cameron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I was saying before we hit record how we share theater audiences and lobbies for quite some time, and this is the first time we've had an opportunity to chat on the podcast. So welcome.
I know. I'm so glad to be here. I've been listening to this podcast for years. I think even before I started writing for Broad Street Review. So I'm very happy to be here finally.
That's it always I'm always blown away that people are listening anyway, which is silly because I know people listen, but it just shows that I'm not really thinking about who is listening. I'm just hoping that whatever we put out will be interesting enough for people to listen to.
I think that's true of anybody I feel that way about writing too. You don't necessarily think about the individual reader, but you hope and you sort of know intuitively that somebody's out there consuming what you're putting forward.
Yeah, exactly. So being that this is the first time on the podcast, tell us a little bit about Cameron.
Sure. Well, I am a journalist and a critic, writing primarily about theater, and I also write a fair bit about music as well. I've been working in the Philadelphia region now for about a little over 6 years. So I've been here for a good amount of time, and most of that time I've been writing for Broad Street Review. I started writing for Broad Street Review in the spring of 2017 and have been pretty consistently writing for the site since then. And as a freelancer, I also write for several other publications, both locally and on a more national level as well. So I'm kind of a jack of all trades in that way, I guess.
I think it's always interesting to discover how one makes their way to criticism. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, so I would say it's probably connected to the fact that I have been obsessed with theater since I was a very small child. And then also, just when I was even a little bit older than that, became very sort of fascinated with journalism and writing. So I think I saw my first professional show, when I was about 3 or 4 years old. So theater has always been a huge part of my life, something that I was fascinated by. And, that I was very privileged to have the means to experience quite a lot from a young age onward. I think my parents recognized that I had an interest in theater. And even though we grew up in we lived in, we didn't live in New York City, we didn't live in Philadelphia, but I had the opportunity to see theater in both of those places and in more regional areas from the time I was a kid on a pretty regular basis. And my love for that just grew and grew. And then by the time I was 6 or 7 and I knew how to read, I was just consumed by and fascinated by newspapers. And I remember I would wait for my dad to come home from work so that he would bring the newspaper home with him, and I would love to read it. and I'd read it cover to cover pretty much. And it awed me that there was sort of this way to put these two things together, which was to be a journalist who writes about theater and writes about the arts, because these are the two areas where I'm the most passionate about intersecting. So I kind of had that even from a young age. I sort of knew that journalism would be my profession, and I had it in my mind that, like, write about the arts, that's where your strengths are, and so I always wanted to do that. And like a lot of people, I took a sort of roundabout way to getting there, but ever since I've been a freelance journalist writing about theater primarily, um, even though it's not the easiest career to navigate these days. It's
Yeah.
something that I'm extremely passionate about, and so happy that I actually get to do.
Yeah. So we've had a long intermission,
Hmm.
and I know that I've seen a lot of shows in a season. And do you have an idea of how many performances or productions that you experience in a given season?
Well, so prior to the shutdown, I was seeing roughly 200 to 250 performances a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And honestly, I know people who see way more than that. But no, it was not. I was usually covering something 5 to 6 nights a week, sometimes 7 nights a week in a crazier time. Sometimes, 2 or even 3 shows a day, especially during a fringe festival kind of situation where, you might be seeing a performance at 11 a.m., a performance at 3, and then another performance at 8 or 9.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so at my peak, I was seeing about 200 to 250 shows. As we're settling back in, I'm sort of consciously trying to bring that number down and appreciate being home more often. And I'm sort of a natural workaholic, but trying to put a pause in that and be more conscious of what I'm seeing and what I'm covering. But ever since, throughout COVID and whatnot for BSR and for other publications, I tried to keep my hand in pretty regularly and cover the theater companies and music companies and whatnot that were putting things out there, because I felt like it was a really important thing to do, to give voice to the companies that were doing really incredible work under the most difficult of circumstances. But and since things have been back more toward in-person things, I've seen a fair amount as well. But um, I I'm relearning the value and the joy of taking it easy as well. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to push myself to do 200 nights out a year again. Um, but if it happens, it happens.
I think I think it was Maxine Waters who sort of coined that term, reclaiming my time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think everyone has kind of gotten into that mindset now. And it's the way I've described it is we've been in a car just barreling down the street, and the wind's in our hair, and we're just like, this is life. I'm loving it, until that car slows down and you're like, you know what? I actually don't love being in a car all the time.
That's so right. And I as often happens, um, you get to know a lot of people when you're in a certain career. You get to know a lot of people who do the same job as you, and a lot of people um, that I talk to were sort of disoriented in the beginning, and it really was kind of like a record scratch. Um, you know, I was I was in a Broadway theater the night before Broadway theaters were shut down. That's how much to the edge it went for me. Um, and the week after, so things shut down on March 12th, 2020, and the week following that, I had a fully booked calendar, so it really was a record scratch moment. And I sort of had to learn what it meant to kind of be home and be sitting with all of these different things and to not be as busy as I'd been. And I've talked to a lot of people who said that they had to kind of sit with that and learn what that meant. And I think for a lot of us, it really was um, a positive learning experience in understanding that, like, you're still your career is valid, your experience is valid, you're a good writer, even if you don't have to write about every single thing, you don't have to see every single thing. You can sort of focus your energy and your attention on the things that are important to you. So I'm taking that with me as we move forward.
Definitely. And so much has happened in all of this time. We've had a civil unrest. We've had a cultural sort of reckoning in arts organizations, and we've had this realization that self-care is actually something we should prioritize and not make, fourth or fifth place in our lives. Yeah, and so it's interesting on this side. We're not the performers, we're the promoters, or we're helping engage that story or further that story along. But just imagine the the actual performers
I
working.
know, and I'm so inspired by the performers who are taking steps to make the industry be more conscious of the fact that, like, this is an industry on all sides that's made up of people,
Mhm.
People who have lives outside of work and people who have, limits to their, what they can do with their bodies. Cause, it's all about, what performers are, their bodies are their vehicles for expression. And, that they shouldn't be working 24/7 in the service just of performance. And I think that goes for journalists and critics and press representatives and everybody as well, because we're also, especially as industries tend to shrink and there are fewer people who are sort of tasked with covering one big industry, you end up stretching yourself pretty thin. So I think we can all learn from each other and learn how to sort of take a moment and say, like, I need to look out for myself and my needs, as well as this sort of big overarching industry that we all care so much about.
Yeah. Over the years, I've seen or experienced, many conversations on either side of criticism. Usually, an organization or a production is looking for kind of a soundbite that they can use to help promote the show. But to hear, truth medicine, it's kind of tough for them. At the same time, it is something they want. What, in your opinion, is the purpose of criticism, of arts criticism?
Well, so I've always been a big believer in the idea that criticism is a historical record, and very much kind of, especially an historical record that should be available for mass consumption. So, there are however many theater companies operating in any given market, and they're producing however many shows a year. And criticism can function, I think, as a way to sort of memorialize and document what those companies were doing, when they were successful, when they were not, which companies were sort of on the cutting edge of what was happening in the world at the time. I mean, you know, especially when you look at theater within the sort of prism of theater, how it's meant to be a reflection of our life and times, you can look at, criticism to see which companies are really sort of addressing the major themes that are happening in the world and which are not. So I think that that's a big part of it too. I think that criticism can certainly be consumer based, and I know that there are people who read reviews to determine whether or not they want to spend their money on a show, because you know not everybody goes to the theater 6 nights a week. Not everybody sees every single show. A lot of people have a budget that they can spend on theater, and that might mean one show a month. Um, and what is it going to be? Um, and I certainly don't view myself or any one critic as the be all end all authority on anything. I mean, I'm just a person with a certain level of experience, who is writing from my own perception and my own views, and that works for some people and it doesn't work for others, and that's to be expected. But I think that criticism, when it functions as kind of a living history of what's happening within a theater ecosystem, as a way to help consumers and just sort of as a way to keep sort of the discussion around theater alive in a public facing way, it's also valuable to me.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, Take us into the room with you as your plus one.
Sure.
When you walk into a space, whether it be an auditorium, performance venue, what have you, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking as you get your tickets and take your seat?
Well, so I always try to consider a lot of different things. Sort of. I like to think of what level I think a theater is at in terms of is this sort of a top tier regional theater? Is this a mid tier regional theater? Is this kind of a DIY space? So sort of what level is the company operating at? Because that is certainly something that affects our perception of the show that ends up on stage. I do like to think about, where the experience starts. Are you, and by that I mean, are you in an immersive experience where like you feel like the theater performance starts the minute you walk into the space? Or is it a case where you get your ticket, you get your program, you sit down, and you're looking at, a curtain that's down and the show doesn't start until the curtain comes out?
Mhm.
I think about whether something's a new work versus whether it's something that's been around for decades or centuries or whatever. Is it Shakespeare? Is it Chekhov? Is it, A Raisin in the Sun, or some play that we are very familiar with? Or is this a brand new play by a local playwright, for example? And you're gonna meet this work where it lives, and really come to terms with and develop an opinion that is not going to be sort of clouded by perceptions of decades. Um, I try to meet every work where it lives, but obviously we all bring our own baggage to every show that we see as well. So I think you've got to acknowledge that as well. But mostly I walk into a theater hoping that I'm going to love whatever I see, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, sometimes it's somewhere in the middle.
Um, can you or do you can you turn off your critical brain when you walk into a space? Um, is there any experience that you hold sacred and choose not to cover?
It it gets difficult. I will be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm so sort of I'm attuned to that, and I think it comes from the fact that that is very much sort of how my brain works, and that I just tend to be a kind of analytical person. So to be perfectly honest, it's very hard for me to go to the theater and not have a critical experience, whether I'm writing about it or not, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I mean, because if I'm just seeing a play or a concert, as an audience member, I love to, after that is over, talk with the people I've gone with it to about, why I felt moved by something or why I didn't. And that to me is a really entertaining and edifying experience. Um, yeah, there are experiences that are sacred to me don't want to, that I don't want to uh, be overly analytical about. But that would be more like, say, going out to dinner with a group of friends and just having some good food and a bottle of wine and not deconstructing every little thing that I'm tasting necessarily. But no, to be honest, theater for me is it's work.
Yeah. Have you ever been to a performance where a technical difficulty um, compromised the experience, like
Well,
held the show, or you know something like that? And how did you respond, or how did you perceive it?
well, it's so interesting that you asked this question because I just saw a performance I went to a show that I was reviewing in New York like 2 weeks ago, an off Broadway play. And uh, there was this noise coming from the audience. Like, I honestly don't know what it was. If it was a cell phone, if it was a like watch alarm, it could have even been like a medical device or something. I don't know, but it was persistent throughout the performance. And about an hour into this play, which was about 90 minutes with no intermission, one of the actors stopped the show and very sort of tactfully asked, like, for wherever this was coming from, if the person could like deal with it because it was distracting, and saying, um, if you're sitting near where this noise is coming, try to help the person make this stop. And it didn't. It continued throughout the rest of the performance. And to be honest, I mean, it was very hard for me as an audience member to come back from that moment because, and I completely understand where the actor was coming from because I can imagine that's very distracting and hard to deal with on the stage. But then I sort of spent the rest of the performance thinking, like, oh, like, what's going to happen if this doesn't stop? Is the actor going to stop the performance now, walk off stage, have a meltdown, like, before the performance is over? Um, and so that totally put me as an audience member in a different mindset after that happened. And it's not, and that's not the first time that having been to the theater as many times as I have in my life, I've seen many technical mishaps. People go up on their lines, show with projections, for example, that fail. Um, you know, and it's always sort of interesting to see how people react in the moment.
Yeah. I love the mishaps that the audience is fully aware of, but they are rooting for
Mm-hmm.
production.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can think of a comedy I saw here in Philadelphia, where an actor broke, and the audience knew because there was a lot of improvisation in the moment,
Yeah.
and the audience just went crazy and just had a better experience because of it. It was just like, there was like this pause. It was like, I got it, get to, and then the audience does like one of those roaring like claps, woo,
Yes.
woo, woo, like, you got it, you got this.
And you have that sort of, it's that conspiratorial moment between the actors and the audience where it's like we're all in this together,
Yes.
and we're all having fun, and like I can see that, like, even though you're a professional, you're clearly enjoying yourself, and you're having a very human reaction to the
Mhm.
moment, and that's a very that can be a very joyous experience.
Yeah. All you can say is that that's the beauty of live theater.
Mhm. It's
It,
live, yeah.
it happens.
You can only control the atmosphere so much.
Yes. Um, let's talk about your time as a Barrymore judge.
Sure.
Because I've been a Barrymore nominator, I've been a Barrymore voter. I know those names changed a couple of times, under the Alliance and under Theater Philadelphia, but I stopped short of judge because of the time commitment, and I realized that I probably was consuming enough
Yeah.
theater to have done it. But tell me about that experience.
So I did one season as a Barrymore nominator and one season as a Barrymore judge. And I was going to say, for me as a critic who sees a lot of theater in any given season, it really was not that different. It did, I mean, honestly, one of the best things about it was that it introduced me to to some companies that even I was not familiar with, especially companies that are maybe operating in the suburbs, which might be outside your purview, or there were some kind of productions that were being self-produced that submitted themselves, um, and I ended up seeing them, and I probably wouldn't have seen them otherwise, and they were really uh, memorable and interesting in that way. And so you get that sense of being able to catch something that you might not have caught. Um, the thing that I'm the most proud of from my time as was that the year that I was a judge at the Barrymores was the first year that they switched to non-gendered categories for performers.
Hmm.
And I was very proud to be on the ground floor of that and to recognize artistry and talent not within gender binaries, and to expand really who could be considered, and who felt comfortable being considered. And by doing so, they expanded the categories so that it's not male and female only or cisgender only. And it's not that, there need to be 7 men and 7 women only in every category. We can expand this and really truly recognize the most worthy performers in every particular field. So that was the probably the most impactful part of being a Barrymore of my season as a Barrymore judge. And I definitely hope that I can come back in some form or another, because I really love the recognition that it offers to the Philadelphia community.
Yeah, definitely. Inclusion is the way forward.
Absolutely.
um, what should we know about critics that we tend to get wrong?
Well, so I think that there are a lot of misperceptions about critics. Uh, I think one is that critics tend to be sort of disgruntled people who are failed actors, failed writers, failed directors, which I've found is almost never the case. I mean, I can speak personally. I never wanted to be an actor. I never wanted to be a director. I wanted to be a journalist, and my area that I'm passionate about is theater. So, when people talk about, what do you really want to do? It's like, well, what I really want to do is be a theater critic, and I am. So, like, that's great. Um, I think there are some people who take the stance that critics are, tend to be not have sort of the technical knowledge needed to review performances, and I don't think that's true at all. A lot of us have studied theater throughout our lives and have seen have seen hundreds of productions in many different places and have a really firm knowledge base to draw from. But I would say most importantly, um, I would hope that people would understand that a critic is just one person, and that person is bringing their unique perspective of the world and of theater and of their taste to whatever they write about, and that one opinion is not the be all and end all of anything. I feel like there's this idea that critics are sort of these judges on high who are issuing forth pronouncements when really a review is just an expression of an experience, and that's how I view it, and that's how I write. I don't I don't ever act like I'm speaking for everybody. I'm speaking for myself and for my own experience, which is colored by my experiences in the world and my personal taste. And I always tell people, for example, if people are going to read reviews, I say, you don't have to agree with everybody. And, maybe my taste is not for you, or maybe it is. And so it's really about kind of recognizing, for example, if you're going to buy a ticket for a play based on reviews, and you've read a couple of my reviews, and you think, wow, I don't think Cameron's taste is similar to mine. That's probably true. So maybe if I'm raving about something, it might not be your cup of tea. Or if something doesn't work for me, it might work for you. Um, you know, I would encourage people to sort of find the reviews that align with their own perspective, and also to know that if you read a review that doesn't align with your perspective, that doesn't mean that your perspective is wrong. That just means that we had a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's my biggest takeaway. Reviews are expressions of experience, and they're very personal.
Yeah. Early on, starting out, I was thinking about what would be the best way to approach a production. And I come from, I entered into theater through stage management. And, I became a director and a producer. And so I started looking at everything through the lens of, wow, well, execution, or I would do this different. I was thinking about what I would do as well, but
Mm-hmm.
I, I knew that that was just my experience, and the foundation of this experience is what is uh, fueling, my mind's discovery engine.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking more because of all of this. And so I always look at, reviews and features as part of the conversation. And
exactly.
yeah, and they're not designed to tell you, like I don't know that I've necessarily read a review that says this trash is on stage until whenever. And if you have money to burn, go and waste it on something like that. It doesn't say that. It's it's
Yeah.
speaking, like you said, it's speaking from a viewpoint, and also inviting you to come in and be a part of that conversation.
Well, and I love that you use the term conversation, because I always view a review as the start of a conversation and not the end of it.
Yeah.
And I can understand that if you view reviews as, the period at the end of a sentence, here's the person who has the platform, and he said this, he loves it, he hates it, whatever. Um, that can seem like the end of a conversation, but no. When I write a review, I would love, I've had many conversations, productive, respectful conversations with people who have felt differently about any given thing than I have. And I love that because, first of all, I don't, I don't presume that I'm right 100% of the time either. And um, there are certainly works that I've felt differently about as the years wear on, both in the positive and negative direction. So, you know, I think that all good criticism should be the start of a conversation and not the end of it.
Yeah. uh based on based on your experience in the theater, is there an ideal seat?
Is there an ideal seat? So this is also highly personal. I like to be in. I like to be about halfway back in whatever theater.
Mhm.
And I do think that um, if you're in sort of a traditional proscenium kind of space, you do want to be kind of centered, maybe not too close. So like 10th row center is kind of perfect. For Broadway musicals, I love sitting in the mezzanine because I love that kind of bird's eye view or something like that. And not just Broadway, but any sort of big sort of Broadway style kind of spectacle musical. But yeah, I would say, and then, if you're in a black box, that's a whole different story. There's really, if you're in a space where it's about intimacy, you want to be as close as possible no matter what. But no, I like to be about maybe 10th row center. That'd be my ideal pretty much anywhere.
Yeah. Let's talk about Broadway for a second. Is there a theater on Broadway where pretty much every seat is the best seat?
A theater on Broadway where pretty much every seat is the best seat. My personal favorite Broadway theater, I would say, is the Booth, which is which is on 45th Street and on Schubert Alley, and it's I think Freestyle Love Supreme is playing there right now. It's just in New York over the weekend. But I've seen so many It's great for plays. It's great for musicals. I think it's about 1,000 seats. Every seat, I've sat like everywhere from the front row to like the last row of the balcony, and every seat is great. It's just sort of the perfect size and the perfect intimacy. And it has kind of and it's an older theater. It has history, which I love. But that's my favorite Broadway theater for sure. Yeah.
I don't have a general opinion about the Broadway theaters. I'm trying to think of I feel like everyone I've been to, I've been okay. I've been happy with the seats. But I always think about that. I do like to sit in a mezzanine whenever possible because it sort of hides the technical.
Well,
focus on it too much.
It's, honestly, when I'm buying tickets myself and I'm not reviewing and it's a musical, I always try to go for like the first, say, 4 or 5 rows of the mezzanine if that's available for a musical, because I think that's the absolute best place to sit. And there's something about having that kind of bird's eye view that just feels so right for that kind of experience. It seems. I remember thinking, like, so I guess this is like now more than 2 years ago. I was reviewing Hadestown on Broadway, and I got like the tickets that they gave me there. I was on the press list, and the tickets they gave me were in the second row on the aisle, which is like it's unconscionable to complain about seats like that, but it almost felt like it was too close. Like I couldn't take in the full picture. And I remember thinking, like, God, I would kill to be sitting in the front row of the mezzanine for this and see like those lights swinging back and forth and everything, and like the people coming up from like underneath the stage and whatnot on the elevators. But yeah, if you're seeing a musical sit in the mezzanine, that's full stop.
I always thought that was interesting. I remember, I think 2 times, when Rent was on Broadway at the Nederlander, at the lottery tickets, and those are the first 2 rows, and they're not, in my opinion, the best seats.
They're often not, because Broadway stages tend to be very high. So the seats in the first couple rows tend to be like far below where the edge of the stage is, so you're craning your neck to look up. So it's just too close. I have some friends who absolutely love that because they love the energy of being that close to the stage. So, for example, the friend that I took with me to see Hadestown, she was in heaven because she loves to sit in the front row or the second row and feel that energy of being so close to the performers, and like seeing like when they're flinging the lights out and like toward the audience, like that they're basically whizzing past our heads. So she was thrilled by that. So on the one hand, I felt like I'm so happy that like I could take her to this and like she could have that experience where like, you know, she was in heaven because she loves being that close. So there is that, you know, there are the people who love that. But yeah, um, close. The closer you are isn't always the best. I would say you'd want to be sort of you want to be in a seat where you can take in the full picture of the stage. And even that, I mean, even that's complicated because the great thing about theater, as opposed to film or television, which are mediums that I love too, is that when you see a play, you create the image you want to focus on because you don't have a camera telling you where to look.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can sit down in your chair and take in the whole stage picture. But if there are three actors on stage, there might be one of those actors who's really hitting it for you that night, and you can't do anything but focus on them. And then the person sitting next to you might be drawn to a whole different aspect of what's going on stage. So, so at the end of the day, you're gonna create your own level of focus.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on virtual theater?
That's a loaded question. Well, so I saw a lot of virtual theater. I reviewed a lot of virtual theater over the course of the pandemic. To be perfectly honest, it doesn't really do it for me. One thing I will say is that, you know, I have sort of an ADHD brain, and I find it harder to disconnect um, and focus on virtual theater the way that I do when I'm in a theater and I can, you know, and I'm more free of distractions.
Mhm.
So virtual theater doesn't really work for me in that area. Um, and I thought there were the productions that the virtual theater productions that really struck me were the ones that were sort of unapologetically designed to be virtual theater. So, like, I don't know if you saw any sort of like the fake Friends productions like Circle Jerk or This American Wife, or um, productions like that that were so kind of very, very much adapted to the virtual world,
Mm.
um, as opposed to, say, like a reading of a play on virtual. Or even like thinking back to some of our local companies, like I really appreciated the way that um, PAC Philadelphia Artists Collective staged their virtual production of Alice Childress's Trouble in Mind, which is one of my favorite plays, and the way that they use sort of virtual technology to um, make it feel theatrical, because that's a play that's very much about the world of theater,
Mhm.
and sort of create the sense that we were watching people inside, you know, a theater space, even though we were seeing a production that was filmed kind of in self isolation. Um, for me, I was drawn more to during the pandemic, being able to watch a lot of and listen to a lot of virtual concerts from around the world that I wouldn't have been able to hear otherwise. And because they tend to not be, you know, it tends to be more about the music in those cases. Um, I had sort of, I was able to give myself over, I think, to that more so. Um, but but yeah, I sort of hope that there is a way to for companies who are interested in doing so to continue producing virtual content, because it seems to have really reached a lot of people who otherwise um, have not always had the opportunities to find themselves in theater spaces. And I think that's a wonderful thing, no matter what.
Yeah. I would love to see an organization that has a main stage, a more intimate black box and a virtual stage.
Yeah, I think that's probably the future. So what it
And
should be.
think about what you could do on it. I could see a lot of I could see, sort of a one person show
Yeah.
might work there. It's kind of like when you're trying to compare a sitcom to a web series.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
not they're not using the same lenses, so we're not getting the same viewpoint. It's not a set, it's an apartment and yeah, and things like that. So
That's a great
it's all of
comparison.
that that kind of pulls you out of it. And I think for us, like, we're calling it virtual theater because I refuse to call it the Z word theater, because that's not the only place you
And
can.
you shouldn't, because I mean, it would be totally inappropriate to not sort of acknowledge the strides that people made over the course of the pandemic
Mm,
to create theater that wasn't just readings on Zoom, to
yeah.
do things that were really creative and really forward thinking, and like they deserve all of the credit. They deserve the credit for that.
Mhm.
Um,
And the fact that this was fairly new, even though the concept was there before, it was kind of a placeholder. And there was this mindset of like, we're only doing this till we can get you back into our theater again. And I really was I hope that moving forward we say, you know what, we loved doing that for certain things. And I really hope that there is still, like, we figure out what it's called, because I was thinking about, we have we have a play, and we have a teleplay,
mhm.
and this is like, what is the name of this virtual thing?
Well, and I mean, and it's not. And you're right. It's not new, because I don't know about you, but like I grew up watching theater, um, filmed theater. I think of when I wasn't seeing theater on stage. I grew up watching Sunday in the Park with George with Mandy Patinkin and Burdette Peters. I grew up watching um, you know, great performances at the Met, and like that sparked my love of opera in so
Right.
many ways. I can remember seeing, the video of Sweeney Todd and Into the Woods and all of the kind of all of those videos that were available in the 90s and early 2000s of film productions, and that's totally was a big spark, and made me feel connected to theater even when I couldn't be inside a theater myself. So, I think for a lot of people, the virtual theater will be a gateway to them, getting to know the art form in a more broader sense.
Yeah, yeah. I know PBS has been there for us.
PBS has been doing the work for 40 years.
I think we kind of forget that. I guess, like, PBS and WHYY are just sitting here with their arms crossed, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
oh, this is hard. You're having a tough
Also, I was
time.
going to say one of the I remember during the pandemic watching Uncle Vanya on WHYY. This was a production from the West End that was performing when the shutdown happened, and after after a couple months had gone by, they brought the cast back in and filmed the production to be aired on public television. And I remember thinking, like, this is ingenious. This is, first of all, it was a stunning production. It was so beautifully done. The acting was so good. But thinking, like, you know, I'm so I'm so awed by these people who are working to keep that thread of theater alive to people in a very dark time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. When you're not covering the art scene, how do you pass the time?
How do I pass the time? Well, so I am a passionate home cook. I'm always cooking. I'm always in my kitchen. Um, and I am always experimenting with a new recipe. Uh, And I also have a passion for wine collecting. And I
Mhm.
actually just started a website about wine from a consumer's point of view. So, because even when I'm not writing about theater, I'm a crazy person who has to be writing about something. So I started my own website as a hobby, like as a way to relax from my main writing job.
What's the web address?
It's called Van du Jers. It's VINDEJERZ.com. So that's where I write about wine and what's interesting me there. I love to travel. I've lived in a lot of different places across the country, so I've got friends all over the place. So I'm road tripping a lot. I'm going back and forth. I like to spend a lot of time with my family at the Jersey Shore. And I bought a house this past year, so my husband and I are spending a lot of time, being kind of doing our HGTV fantasies at our home. So, I mean, that's another reason why I don't call it taking a step back, but being more conscious of the amount of time that I spent in theaters because, like, you know, I want to enjoy my home.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot of things we just didn't, you know, we were putting on hold because of this. We kept calling it a hustle, calling it
Yes.
a grind, and we were okay with doing that. And I think a lot of people were fine being in a tiny apartment or having several roommates because they were always out and about. But once they got into a space where they had to be there more often, I mean, they talk about how so many people are renovating their homes now and doing all these necessary upgrades, and everybody's, if you didn't have a home office before, like you might have one now, and all of those things have, there
I
were
feel that.
things that you had to think about.
I feel that so much because I mean, my husband and I were living for 5 years in, a two-bedroom apartment that felt totally fine when we were not there 90% of the time.
Mhm.
And then sort of all of a sudden you're home 100% of the time. You're trying to work from home, fighting for space. And I remember saying, I said, maybe like 3 months into the pandemic to my husband, like, you know, as soon as it's feasible for us to move, we have to move. We have to get something bigger. I just can't do this. So we waited. I mean, we waited a year. We waited through the worst of COVID, through vaccination and everything, and thought like, okay, you know, at the moment when things had cooled down a little bit, like, let's buy a house right now. And we got super lucky where we kind of, sailed through the process in about 2 months and ended up in a beautiful house that we absolutely love. So, but now that, and that's given me so much more perspective as well.
Yeah. Eh, there are a lot of people doing it. They are soldiering through. I feel like this is kind of like the trial period as the beginning of a season. Are we ready to return to in-person events?
I think absolutely. And I've been telling everybody this. I feel um, I feel so comfortable being in theaters right now. I've had nothing, and I was on edge to go back. I'll be honest, um, because so there were a couple of sort of test run experiences um, in the spring where there were companies that were doing like more socially distanced in-person productions, and this was also after kind of vaccination was widespread and available. And like I went to a couple of those things and I saw some behaviors where I thought like, oh God, I don't know if we're ready for this.
Mhm.
But as the summer wore on and we got into the space where it seemed like there were going to be a lot of productions happening, a lot of productions opening and things getting back to quote unquote normal, I thought, okay, I'm gonna commit to trying this out and see what it feels like. And honestly, to me, it feels very safe, very smartly done, and I feel very comfortable. I mean, when you think about it, if you're in a theater space these days, everybody is vaccinated, everybody is masked. Whether or not there's social distancing, the risk mitigation has been done to a degree that you end up feeling really comfortable. The audiences I've been with so far have been extremely conscientious. I've not seen one instance of animosity or fighting between people, or people who are behaving in a asshole sort of way, for lack of a better word. I've been to Broadway, I've been to the Met, I've been to Philadelphia Orchestra several times, I've been to Philly theaters on the larger and smaller end of the thing, and everything has worked like a glove, very smoothly. So I often say, like, you can probably feel safer in a theater right now than you could feel in um, a lot of other situations. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to everybody's personal comfort level. But for me, I feel very comfortable, and I feel like this is where we should be.
Yeah.
And I have so much respect and admiration for the companies that have faced this head on and are forging forward.
Yeah. Definitely not at the numbers I was at before the
Yes,
pandemic, but I've been in many theaters. I was emotionally floored to be in Verizon Hall during art launch. That
absolutely.
was just such a beautiful moment, and just to welcome back the Philadelphia Orchestra to the stage, and that was such a great experience. And I just think about the energy and the audience is already ready. Like, I don't know where people are. Like, maybe it's sporting events or something like that, but I don't know that arts and culture is where, I mean, I don't know that theater is where people are going to be super problematic. There's
Yeah,
uh,
that's true.
so much involved in like getting yourself to the theater that you're not coming there
Well,
without taking all your necessary precautions.
I'm at the Philadelphia Orchestra pretty much every week because it's a major part of it's one of the major places that I cover. And I love that, every single week when they make their pre-show announcement and they say, welcome back to Verizon Hall, welcome back to the
Mhm.
Philadelphia Orchestra, people cheer, and
Yeah.
it feels so moving. Like, you can tell how much the audiences were hungry to be back there.
Yeah.
And how appreciative they are. And especially when you see a lot of, the kind of longtime older audience members who, you know, um, go to such pains to be there, like you say, and they're, it's not as easy for them as it is for me or you to go to these places. That fills my heart with a lot of joy, and just to see um, that we can pick up where we left off. I mean, there are lots of behaviors and practices and ideas that we should leave in the past, but picking up where we left off in the sense of gratitude for having the opportunity to be in these spaces and have these experiences is such a great thing as for me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Cameron, I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I can't believe it took so long to get you here, but I'm glad you're here, and I
Yes.
hope you will come back, and we can get down and more specific and talk more about
Anytime you want to have me back, I'll be here, and we can talk once more places open, once more of the theaters open up, because the Philly theater community has been very smart, I think, overall,
Mhm.
in staggering sort of their reopening. But I know it's going to hit its stride in the beginning of 2022, and we can get together then and talk about what we're seeing when everything's back in full swing. I would love to do that.
Yeah, yeah. So tell our listeners how they can keep in touch with you, or
Yes.
where you are and what you're doing.
Well, you can always find my reviews on Broad Street Review. Um, I usually, uh, you know, I'm that's probably my most regular outlet, and I'm very happy to say that. Um, so you can always find me there. I am on Twitter at Cameron P. Kelsall, which is my full name. C-A-M-E, or no, sorry. Yes, Twitter, Cameron P. Kelsall. Cameron P. Kelsall. Instagram, C. Kelsall. Facebook, don't really mess with that.
It's somewhere in the metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. You said it. Find me at the theater. I wear a mask now, so maybe you won't recognize me, but if you do, say hi.
Yeah. And if you see me, I'll point him out to you.
Yes, indeed. But I always love to talk to people and about what they're into and what they're seeing. And so, but yeah, Twitter, Instagram, all the normal channels. I also write for a bunch of different publications as well. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll probably see where my many, many, many thoughts are being dispersed.
Yes. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Cameron Kelsall, longtime contributor of Broad Street Review, and we'll have links to how you can find, past reviews and how to stay in touch with Cameron. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's truly a pleasure.
Thank you.
Want to get involved with Broad Street Review? Head on over to our website at www.broadstreetreview.com and click Get Involved at the top. While you're there, help keep us running and click Donate to find out how. Connect with us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter at BroadST Review. Thank you for helping to keep the conversation going.